At one point, the idea of the WWE and the UFC being cooperative seemed almost impossible. And nowadays, they're almost the same company. The UFC sees itself as a different market than the WWE. However, Vince McMahon never saw the WWE as anything other than a competition with everybody else.
He's one of those guys who would just stick it to me just to do it for, for whatever reason.
He's a killer. He's buried the hatchet in my back a few times.
Man, but better at business, man.
Oh, by far.
And at some points, it has gone pretty dicey.
Vince wanted to fight me. I swear to God.
And at some point, it can get very destructive.
Just before I fought Anderson Silva, and it was basically a offer, no call, no show. Be on Raw with the belt on Monday to stick it up Dana White's ass. What?
The first time, it was Goldberg. No, not that Goldberg, like Mike Goldberg.
Then I got a phone call from Vince McMahon. It's the one message I wish I would have saved.
Mike Goldberg's contract expired and he got no warm regards, no explanations, no nothing.
What's the deal? Like, did he decide to leave, or are you who's being?
When these kind of things happen, I'd rather not talk about it.
What makes it even more compelling though is that at one point Vince McMahon had a convoluted plan to use Mike Goldberg to take down the UFC. This story goes all the way back to 2005, back when MMA was struggling. The UFC had massive debt and the UFC also was trying to crawl itself out of a massive hole that their previous marketing had dug them into. You tell somebody that somebody's gonna die in the cage and they might actually believe you. And some people did.
2 men enter, 1 man leaves. Well, what is that suggesting? That's suggesting that someone's gonna die.
What do you think of, the Ultimate Fighting Championship today? What's your assessment?
I still don't like it. I still think it's exploitive, and I still think it's too brutal. But they are correct in the respect that they have made some changes for the better.
Vince had made what he considered a mistake by letting the UFC air on his network, Spike TV. At the time, Monday Night Raw was airing Spike TV at prime time, and the UFC was promoting itself to come right after Raw, which is very smart because they had the same demographic.
Ultimate Fighter premieres Monday after Raw, only on Spike TV.
So what's the problem? Well, as Chael Sonnen says, this prompted an immediate phone call from Vince McMahon to Dana White.
So Vince is saying to Dana privately, why would anybody watch my scripted show when they can just wait till it's over to watch your real show? Do not advertise your show during my show again. And Dana's kind of sitting there shrugging his shoulders going, who Spike decides to run the marketing and the advertising and to piggyback off of it? Man, it's got nothing to do with me. Vince McMahon contacts Mike Goldberg and he tells Mike Goldberg, I will give you $100,000 to no call, no show the UFC. Goldberg does the right thing, and the very first person he calls is Dana. And Vince tells him, this call never happened, and I will wire you this money on your word.
And they wanted to make a statement going head-to-head against the UFC. And in the Attitude Era, this was extremely common. You saw it go back and forth between WCW and WWE. It was an old competitive tactic. Now, all of a sudden, it was happening to the UFC though. And there's a great interview about Mike Goldberg talking about it online. But WWE was not done. They would strike again. At this point, the UFC was going head to head with Monday Night Raw. So Vince decided to take it a step further.
So Dana right then realized if he's willing to pay $100,000 for my announcer who is replaceable, and I'm only paying my main event 18 and 18, I got a problem. This is a level of thinking, of strategy, of business play that I'm just not ready for. Not only did Goldberg stay, not only did the business change, the Ultimate Fighter never played Monday nights again. The Ultimate Fighter moved to Wednesdays and has never gone back.
While Chael's recollection is not exactly right, it is still largely true. Back then, Raw was doing well more than double the ratings and in the same key demographic, so why would you want to go head to head against that? So the UFC decided to move their Ultimate Fighter to a different time, which was certainly the intention of Vince McMahon's counter programming. But he would have to go an extra step. Vince started putting ads on the UFC's Ultimate Fighter for people to leave Spike TV and go to the USA Network and watch WWE. Now you might be wondering, why did Spike TV allow all this to happen? And they did it. But here's the thing, Spike TV had regional broadcasters as well, meaning that you only need to call a syndicator and put a local ad, and that local ad would air because it wasn't going through Spike TV. So Vince did, and his tactic was successful once again. People were leaving The Ultimate Fighter to go watch Raw. However, this doesn't stop here. They already tried to steal their announcer and to not let him be successful in business when going head to head. But you know what they haven't done? They haven't taken the champion yet. When Chael Sonnen was in the midst of his massive UFC run and was UFC World Champion, Vince McMahon made an offer to Chael.
Was that prior to 117 or 148?
The second one.
Someone called you and asked you not to show.
No call, no show. I got 2 offers. Or the second one was do show and beat him and be on Raw with the belt on Monday.
This is insane.
And that was a much bigger offer.
Who called?
I can't tell you. I said, why would they want that?
Yeah.
Why would they want that? And he said, he paused and he said to stick it up Dana White's ass.
What? How much money are we talking about?
7 figures.
7 figures?
Yeah.
And to this day, I would have done it. I would have taken the belt. I would have been on Raw. I just don't know how it would have stuck it to Dana. I don't know how Dana would have any kind of a problem with that. How's that stick it to Dana? I understand. But I don't get how that hurts.
Right.
Because I wouldn't do anything that would hurt Dana, but I don't understand how that would hurt Dana.
And actually, I agree with Chael right here. What would Vince be wanting from all of this? Maybe he wanted to confuse people whether the UFC was scripted or not. But I think just watching maybe would smarten you up to that. I don't know. I really don't know, and boggles my mind what Vince wanted to do here. Maybe he just wanted to stick it up to Dana somehow. Whatever that meant in his head. Dana would be like, that's great publicity. I don't know. But at the end of the day, it was all about a power play. Just show Dana that WWE is a big game in town. And their champions are not going to be as loyal as Dana might think their champions are going to be. So you've tried to take their announcer, you've tried to take their TV, and you've tried to take a champion. Why don't you try to take the head of it all? Why don't you try to take the matchmaker? Vince would go ahead and do that. Joe Silva could be considered the best matchmaker in the UFC's history. Now, how would that have translated to wrestling? I don't think it would have been good. I think we can all agree that if the fact that you can make matchmaking in UFC doesn't mean that you're gonna be a great booker in wrestling. But once again, Vince just wanted to do it, I guess, to stick it up to Dana and just mess with the UFC's booking and have them lose coherence. I don't even think that would have worked, but I guess in Vince's brain it did. Joe Silva was a big fan of wrestling growing up, but it doesn't mean that he can book wrestling just because he was a matchmaker in the UFC. It's a completely different beast. Also, we got 2 figureheads. The figurehead of WWE against the figurehead of the UFC. So, White against McMahon. No, literally, White against McMahon. That was another power play that Vince tried to do on Dana. I know, talk about crazy promotional tactics. I don't think it gets any crazier than this one. Vince McMahon actually challenged Dana to a real fight. And the funniest thing is, if Vince had lost, he would have loved it.
Or ever in an interview anywhere. If Vince hears this, he's going to go nuts, okay? Vince is too old. Vince wanted to fight me. I swear to God. Called me up and said, let's do it. Let's do it we can either do it in the UFC or let's do it at WrestleMania.
That's amazing.
Ariel Helwani tried to give an interview and try to get a follow-up on this questions about Vince.
Do this.
Took that call with Vince. What was your reaction?
I said, you're crazy. Are you crazy? I laughed and said, you crazy?
Did you think he was joking?
No. He's a competitive maniac.
Was it a personal thing? Like, do you think he doesn't like you? Does he want?
Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he wanted to kick my ass on national television. I don't know. He's a competitive maniac.
Yes, he's a competitive maniac. It doesn't get any better said than that. Once again, we're all trying to figure out what's going on in Vince's brain because Dana's not a fighter and neither is Vince. So it would have been somewhat humiliating to Dana. I don't know if it would, but this never ended up happening. And this is not the first time he's had this tactic. WCW had this exact same tactic against Vince, and Vince was actually about to go to WCW and do it. Eric Bischoff himself has said, I would have gotten my ass kicked. I wouldn't have cared because you were coming to our ground and doing it. Maybe the same thing with Dana. So Vince has tried to poach pretty much everybody from the UFC at this point. But what about when their fighters, when their wrestlers go into fighting? Of course, Vince is gonna block him. Vince is not gonna allow this to happen. Case in point, CM Punk. Now hear me out, I know Vince could have probably helped the UFC's credibility by blocking CM Punk, but CM Punk was no longer in WWE's contract. But this is not what we're talking about. CM Punk was actually going to appear in a harmless promotional capacity in the UFC. CM Punk wanted to come out and walk out Chael Sonnen with the title. Everybody would be talking about that big title and the person that walked out, Chael Sonnen, not so much about the UFC. But Vince refused to do this and give any sort of clout to the UFC.
Hey, my friend Chael's fighting in Chicago for UFC, and I already talked to all of them, and they're totally cool with the idea. I'm going to walk him to the Octagon, and tomorrow's the Royal Rumble, so it'll get some last-minute buys. No offense to Chael. Nobody's going to be talking about him. They're going to be talking about the WWE champion walking him to the Octagon. Oh my God, Phil, no, we can't do that. That's barbaric. Somebody's gonna die. He sort of died in your ring.
Someone's gonna die?
That's what he said. He said somebody was gonna die in the Octagon.
Everyone's gonna die.
And of course, Vince had to take it beyond that.
There's also Paul, did you know that they're gonna have women fight in the Octagon soon? And I was like, yeah.
It makes me wonder how many times Vince had things like this being blocked from happening. And definitely very ironic considering he wanted to steal the UFC's talent for his own use. And he's even brought UFC fighters and has addressed them when it benefits him. So clearly this is more about screwing the UFC rather than any sort of promotional strategy. The Chael walkout would have gone viral back then, but it's a weird one. And when Brock Lesnar went to the UFC, the WWE did say that they were not supporting the fact that Brock Lesnar was having a fight. However, it was kind of out of their hands apparently. And when you ask Brock Lesnar about it, he'll just tell you he didn't give up about it. Why would they want their star to get injured? It makes sense. At least there though, you could start to see the change in the mindset of Vince. Vince would actually take some seats to go watch the fight, even though he did give Dana White some cheap seats in exchange.
I gave him much better seats than he gave me when I went to see Ronda. People were coming up to me and going, "Why are you sitting in these seats?" I said, well, this is where they sat me, so fuck them, I'm gonna sit right here.
But of course, things get a lot crazier than this. Like the WWE blocking the UFC's lifeblood, their money. If you're not a ESPN 30 for 30 fan, one episode that I would recommend if you had enjoyed this video is the XFL video, where Vince creates an entire football league and they go into how Vince became friends with the top executives from NBC. And when the UFC had to negotiate their TV deal, NBC was the highest bidder. But Vince has the right to veto any combat sports that might go into the USA Network or NBC.
We were about to do a deal with NBC. We get to the 1 yard line and Vince has the final say who can go on USA Network and who can't if you're a combat sport.
Wow.
Lorenzo and I flew out to Connecticut, sat down with him and we're like, hey, we're doing a deal with NBC. And Vince just sits back like Vince sits and how he is. But you need to sign off on it. He's like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And we're like, why? I'm just not interested in it. I don't like the idea of you guys being on USA Network. So the whole deal blows up.
And in case you wanted to know, this also could have happened with Spike TV, but for whatever reason, Vince let it happen. And then he regretted it immediately. I don't know if he just wanted to be the big dog or whatever it was, but he just wouldn't let it happen. Given this was also around the time that Vince was trying to sabotage the UFC and try to block them in any sort of way they could. And the last one is even more crazy, trying to ban them outright. Yes, now the UFC is pretty much legal almost all over the world, and it's rather the exception for them to be banned in a certain city. But the WWE actually went out campaigning for the UFC to be banned in Europe and in different countries. This is one of the main reasons that the UFC was illegal in New York State for so long. Vince McMahon has been running Madison Square Garden since the start of the WWE, so it would make sense that that was the last state to even accept the UFC as a sport. This goes to show how powerful Vince McMahon was in the television industry at this time. While yes, the UFC was outdrawing him in pay-per-views, Vince was the king of TV. The WWE was the king company of TV. But I will give Vince is doing one of the things. The UFC and the WWE are different sports. However, they have the same beginning. So check out this video right here to see how everything started. And also, Forbes came out with a list with the most valuable combat sports promotions. Now the UFC is number 1, WWE is at number 2. Number 3 is All Elite Wrestling. And number 4 could be the next top competitor of the UFC. So check that video out to see what promotion that is. And I'll see you in that video. See ya!